They can't break me down. They can't break me
This is Sweet Radio SVG. I'm Cleo. Welcome to our program, Life No Sugar Added. And this is the program where we look at issues which affect Caribbean people from the perspective of Caribbean people. We look at domestic violence, we look at child abuse, we look at substance abuse. We've dealt with LGBTQI issues, and in today's case, we're going to be dealing with invisible illnesses. Now, this edition of Life No Sugar Added is personal to me because my guest is my cousin, Elona Alexander. Elona, welcome to Sweet Radio SVG, and thank you for consenting to share your story with us on Life No Sugar Added.
Hi, Cleo. Thank you so very much for having me.
Now, we're talking about invisible illnesses, and you, unfortunately, have been afflicted by not one, but two of these invisible illnesses, both autoimmune diseases, one lupus and the other one Sjogren syndrome. Tell us about these diseases.
I'll start with Sjogren syndrome to give a short background of what the disorder is. It is a condition that is often accompanied by another immune system, such as rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, and lupus, I should say. It is where the immune system attacks the secretory glands throughout the body. It is estimated about 15 to 18% of the people living with lupus to have Sjogren syndrome, which is considered a secondary Sjogren syndrome. The reason why, they haven't fully know the reason of what caused these disorders, but just like lupus, they believe it's a combination of genetics or environmental as well as hormonal factors. But they both can affect your kidney, your blood vessels, lungs, liver, your pancreas and brain, as well as to make you predisposed to non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is a rare cancer, most commonly with Sjogren syndrome if left untreated. And lupus, the other autoimmune disorder that I mentioned before, also known as systemic lupus erythematosus, such a long term, is a complex condition that can lead to serious organ failure or organ damage. It's a disease that occurs when your body's immune system mistakenly attacks your own tissues and organs. There are various types, or at least 4 or 5 main types of lupus. You have, as I said, systemic lupus erythematosus, also called SLE, cutaneous lupus erythematosus, which is CLE. I'm sorry for that. It's just that the terminology is extremely long, which affects only the skin. Drug-induced lupus, which is a short-term type of lupus caused by certain medicine. And once you stop taking that medication, the symptoms for that disorder would cease as well. And then you have neonatal lupus, which is a rare type of lupus that affects newborn, where it is passively transmitted from the mother to the child. And discoid lupus erythematosus, which is also DLE, is a form of CLE or cutaneous lupus. But it mostly affects individuals on their scalp or in face, where they develop different types of sores on those parts of their body. Systemic lupus is the most common and serious type of lupus because it affects your overall body. It causes widespread inflammation and tissue damage in the affected organs. What if it is your heart, your lung, your kidney, your brain, whatever organ, even the hair follicles on your head, whatever is affected, it can cause permanent scarring and damage to that area of your body. It can, as I said before, but it can affect your joints, your skin, even your lungs, your blood vessels. And there is no cure for lupus, neither for Sjogren syndrome. But with medical intervention and lifestyle changes, you can help control it. The other symptoms for both lupus and Sjogren syndrome, but I think it's more prevalent with lupus in being anemic and affecting or having low blood counts. So sometimes you might have that malaise feeling of just never feeling well, or you have another symptom called Raynaud phenomenon, which restricts blood flow to your blood vessels. So sometimes you have that numb pain, or your fingers are somewhat pale or white and it's painful. So that's one symptom of Raynaud's phenomenon. And it's more common during winter season, especially in very cold climates.
No, that was like a really nice snapshot of what one would experience if they have lupus or if they
I
have
hope I did a
Sjogren
good
syndrome.
explanation.
It was amazing. I mean, that was like lupus and Sjogren's for Dummies 101. Of all of those symptoms that you've mentioned, how have you been affected personally?
There's a whole story of my symptoms when it comes to lupus and Sjogren syndrome, starting from my early 20s right into my 30s. And just as a disclosure, I found out, or I was diagnosed with both in 2018. Uh, it's it's quite a journey and I'm still figuring it out as time goes by, because every year there's a new symptom. And it's not just one symptom. Sometimes it's a few symptoms at the same time. At one point, I had a speech problem where it was difficult to even speak or pronounce certain words. I know what I want to say, but for some reason, I'm struggling with it. Or I would have hand tremors, particularly with my left hand because I'm left-handed. So my rheumatologist would have, he would explain that you're displaying some sort of neurological issues. And then, you have other symptoms such as brain fog. And I could remember having memory issues, which is why sometimes, even for the program that we're doing, I've made my notes because I could no longer rely on my memory for everything. And even within that, you worry if you are exhibiting early signs of, say, Alzheimer's, simply because it's not just forgetting where you put your keys or you misplace something. It's like in the middle of a conversation, your memory goes blank and I don't remember what I was talking about, or you're struggling to even say certain words. It's so hard to summarize because it's paired with other health issues that I discovered as time went by. From in my early 20s, my early 20s, from having flu every 2 weeks, a full-blown flu, not a mild cold, to the lung issues, to at one point I was admitted to the hospital because I had a kidney issue, to hair loss, to even within the first year, and how old? I was in my early 20s, the first year when I arrived to Taiwan, which is where I studied for architecture. And my upper body, probably from my abdominal area right up to my neck, I had eczema. At first, I thought it was chicken pox, and I was freaking out because I said, I am not having chicken pox again, and I'm all the way in Taiwan. This is not happening. But then I went to my dermatologist and she said, no, you have eczema and it's quite normal and common. I'm in my head, I'm like, no, it's not, because I've never had eczema before. So this is at peak time in summertime, around 33 degrees, 34 degrees Celsius. And I'm in turtleneck, winter clothes, turtleneck, because one of the things that trigger that type of skin reaction is extreme heat. So you have to do the umbrella. Well, you have to use a UV umbrella. You have to cover up your skin. Do not expose it too much to the sunlight. And this is just with eczema. So when winter time came, I had a different effect on my scalp. So I'm thinking, oh my God, this thing is spreading to my scalp. What was happening on my body was now on my scalp. And it was sores and lesions. And at this time, I had my natural hair, everything. And, doctors like, oh, probably, like what they say with females who, if you continue to relax your hair or if you wear, I was like, no, my hair is natural. I don't do any of those things at the time. And I just treated it the way how I treated my skin, but I realized nothing was changing except for in the wintertime, I wasn't having a scalp issue. No, sorry, in the wintertime, I was having a scalp issue, but in the summertime, I wasn't having a scalp issue. So I realized that fast forward to now, wherever my immune system was attacking, or whatever issue my immune system was having, it was responding different based on the climate that I was in. So, during that period was a rough time because in always feeling sick, like I said, every 2 weeks it was a full-blown flu and it affected my studies in a way that I couldn't attend classes because I was having very high fever, I couldn't function, and I was always skipping classes. And there's a rule that in school you have, if you miss 3 days of class, it's an automatic fail. And then on top of it, I was going through a depression. And it wasn't because of not being home for 4 or 5 years or, you're away from your family. No, it wasn't one of those things. It was just something that I felt something was wrong inside of me. It didn't feel right, but I just didn't know what was the cause. Even though when someone do look at you, oh, you look fine, you look healthy, but no one really understood what I was going through health-wise because I kept a lot to myself. You didn't want to seem like the weak one or the one who always had health issue or the one who seemed to be struggling. So a lot of things I never shared with anyone until worst case happened. But the symptoms can vary from mild to severe to life-threatening. And I'm not sure if I did mention the previous, like the painful and swollen joints, the fever, the hair loss, even pleurisy, the severe chest pain, even for heart endocarditis, which is the inflammation of the heart lining, chronic fatigue. And this is not, you can get a couple good nights sleep and in the morning you feel refreshed and you can go again. It's like the life of you was knocked out of you completely and you have no life inside of you, not even to get up. To even the ulcers that you could have in your nose and your mouth, enlarged lymph nodes.
Ilona, that was, my goodness, quite a mouthful, and it sounds also scary. You mentioned that Sjogren syndrome is a disorder of the secretory glands. What exactly does that mean?
It affects anything that is, I think of your mucus or from your nose, your salivary glands, how dry your mouth is, your eyes, even symptoms such as causing vaginal dryness. It may seem as simple as that, but it's not that simple. But it affects, I think it's called exocrine gland, I think. I'm not too sure of the correct
So you're
terminology.
looking at your tear ducts, etc.
Right. Yes, it affects all of those things. And it might seem, oh, it's not that serious, it's non-threatening. I said it is because anything that affects your lymph nodes is going to affect your overall lymphatic system. And, if left untreated, it can, as I mentioned before, with a very rare cancer, it can lead to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And that's something that you need to be, you have to be very careful with your health. So you have to stay hydrated. It may seem a bit superficial, but you do hear a lot of women in particular who have the Sjogren syndrome, they experience dental issues. And I think a few dentists here, they're trying to push the awareness of Sjogren syndrome. But because Sjogren syndrome affects your salivary gland, and the less saliva your mouth produces, it increases your chances of having cavities. So it also has the effect of what you call it, dental, I don't want to call it destruction, but it can affect your the structure of your teeth.
What exactly were the circumstances that led up to you getting a diagnosis for Sjogren's and lupus? Because my understanding of these things is that, as you said, because the symptoms so often mimic other diseases, and sometimes they
Mhm.
can appear to be vague, even though they're distressing to you, it takes a while before you are actually given a concrete diagnosis.
Yes, my executive admin officer warned me. Well, she basically on a minor level, she threatened, if you don't tell your parents, I'm going to call and tell your mother that you're not doing well. And it's because, as students away, you don't want to stress or worry your parents that you're not doing well. And, it's a possibility you might have to take a break from your studies to focus on your health. Even though I would advise anyone, no matter your age and no matter where you are in life, whether it's school or work, take the time off that you need to get your health together, then resume whatever it is you're doing. But I think there's that saying or that expectation, I should say, not saying that's the word I was looking for. The expectation of you have to do well no matter what. So, I came back. I had no choice. I had to come back to focus on my health because now I am in a full blown, I think they call it manic disorder depression or something like that. I can't remember the terminology. And I think like my school did the best that they can, but they were treating it from a psychological perspective that you're having, not perspective, but from a psychological position that you're having depression probably because you're away from home or you're not coping well with stress when that was not the case. But it was more of there's an internal issue, there's something happening inside of your body that was causing the depression. And fast forward to 2018, I think there was a flu that was going around. I'm not sure if it was a H1N1 around that time. I thought I picked it up and it went from a flu. I was on sick leave, it went from a flu to having a severe fever. And all the time I'm thinking this is the flu, and you just take your usual medication to treat it. And I noted that my left leg felt a little bit heavier than usual. When I went to see my doctor, he even thought it was something serious. And between that time and when I came back, he had my health records and it showed that I was anemic, I had low blood count, and all of those issues. So even fast forward to in 2022, there were markers in the past that showed that you had symptoms of lupus from not just a clinical assessment, but from your lab test. And in 2018, he was very concerned that this is more than you having a flu or something else. And because the leg was increasing over a period of time, he was more concerned that you have DVT. I had a blood clot basically, and it became life threatening because of the location of it. Now, when you look at everything from the flu to the high fever, the blood clots, and all of my lymph nodes was literally enlarged. But because of where the blood clot was, it was pressing on my main vein. Because of the size of it, it was twice the size of it. And they couldn't do a biopsy to test it because it was too big to do a biopsy on. And that led my doctor to do the serology test. And I think what was it called? It was to do a antibody or anti-nuclear, one of those tests that to confirm if there are specific antibodies in your blood, but it's to confirm if you have some sort of autoimmune issue, because he said this is more than just a blood clot. So I remember in 2018, it was just like a emotional whirlwind because there's so many things going on at the same time, from finding out you had a blood clot. And I was more devastated about it because you can't see what's going on inside of your body. And to me, a blood clot is life threatening because most people, or a lot of people, they do not survive a blood clot if they're not aware of it in time, especially if you have pulmonary embolism. And from there, I found out, you have Sjogren syndrome and lupus. And I was terrified because I knew of the disease, lupus in particular. I didn't know anything about Sjogren syndrome. But I knew of one girl who we went to school together and she died from lupus. But I should say she died from lupus complications, but she had lupus. And she died pretty young. I think she was in her late 20s, I believe. And, just to hear that, at the time, it felt like hearing someone say you have cancer. Like my mom is a very cheerful, happy person. So I remember being on sick leave during that time. And then when she came to me and spoke to me, I just saw this over this, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like if you took all the joy out of my mom's face. And it felt like if you were just given a death sentence because before they even confirmed the lupus and Sjogren syndrome, it was also possibly of lymphoma because all of my test results, my lymph nodes were enlarged, everything else was pointing to that. But you have still, as worried as you were, you still have a positive outlook on life. I think I was more worried about my mom because I'm her only child. So I keep teasing her to say, you see what happened? This is why you should have had a second child. What we call it an insurance policy in case
It's
something
good to
happened
know
to the
that you
boy.
still were able to, take a humorous look at your situation despite the dire
Right.
circumstances that you were experiencing. Once you got your diagnosis, Ilona, how were you able to, one, accept it, and two, make the adjustment that you needed to start moving forward and to start climbing back up the hill?
Wow. Uh, it's such a long journey, Cleo. Because it's still a struggle now. And I think I mentioned this to you in a previous conversation. I said, I'm not sure if it's with age as you get older. I'm becoming more emotional, but I'm living life differently, or at least I have a different mindset. I've always had a different mindset, but I think when you have a chronic illness, you sort of look at life in a way. It's not so it's not, I don't want to say schedule. Schedule is a heavy word. You learn to let go of the things you can't change and try to live a life of quality, and to spend more time with the people who matters most to you and do what you can at hand with what you have and with what you know. And it's quite a journey because I know at one point I stopped taking all my medication for lupus. I didn't realize it took probably a month at least for it to completely be out of your system because I didn't believe I had lupus. I'm wondering, did the medication I took induced it? So I said, you know what, to try and probably prove wrong, stop taking everything. As soon as I stopped taking all the medication and that's 1 month mark, I started to feel how I felt back in 2018. And 2018 was probably the worst of all of my experiences. And I realized once I started the medication, I felt a little bit better than before. So I think it's coming to the acceptance of having it and what it means. I know, and I always go back to 2018 because it's one of the most informative years I had, and the experience of having pleurisy for the first time, where it felt like I was having a heart attack, and it was going for so long. And I thought I was going to die, and I couldn't get on to my mother to call, Mommy, I think I'm having a heart attack. And, from having, oh my gosh, there's this other condition. I cannot even remember what it's called. It starts with R, but it's when you're having a flare up. It's a musculoskeletal issue where it's sensitive to touch. You couldn't touch me at all. and it was in a lot of pain. And I know my mom meant well, and she would want to try and hug, and I said, no, no, you can't touch me. So you go through different symptoms or phases, or there's a severe and there's a very mild one, but it's still a journey in accepting it, because you're just into different symptoms when it appear. I lost years of my life because of the disease, and then there was the depression aspect of it, where I was basically, I don't know how to describe it. Mentally, I just checked out, and I'm finding myself going to a part that you and I discussed about that I wasn't sure if I wanted to mention, because
They can't break me down. Yeah.